All right. So we've got the steadfast and the strong with us for the third and final panel. The panel is entitled Expanding Financial Supports. My name is Rachel Weber. I'm a professor here at the GSD. I teach urban planning, and I teach courses on real estate finance and public and private development. Happy to see some of my students in the audience. And we have an awesome last panel for you today. So as we know, it's kind of a truism that capital is power, right? It can have a negative kind of power, and like the power to say no. So capital lenders, equity providers can restrict the kinds of tenure, building types, locations that housing developers and housing owners want to build in. We know that capital can make demands on those in the housing world to raise rents, for example. It can make capital available to different borrowers on different terms. And we know that capital has the power to enable, right? To enable new ownership formats or new kinds of building programs. So our last panel is to discuss, we are going to discuss the different ways in which capital affects social housing. And I'm going to ask our panelists to envision and imagine a financing system to support social housing, right? What would it look like? Right? We can't leave creative financing just to Wall Street, right? We were just hearing about sort of different ways of structuring financing, how important it is, whether you're trying to buy motels in Vermont or trying to help owners purchase manufacturing housing and manufactured housing in New Hampshire that Mary was talking about. We see how important financing is, and other panelists and moderators have touched on this. It really is such a critical issue as we move forward envisioning the different possibilities. So we are very lucky to have with us three experts on this topic. We have to my left Crystal Cornegay, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Mass Housing, Massachusetts State Housing Finance Agency. And in 2024, Mass Housing launched the Momentum Fund, which is a revolving equity fund to ensure predictable and ongoing investments in housing. And next to her, we have Tanya Hannell and her daughter, Ida. Yay, our special guest. And Tanya is the development director at East Boston Community Development Corporation. And in 2023, EBCDC partnered with several other organizations to create a neighborhood trust that acquired 114 homes to ensure their permanent affordability, drawing on a combination of public, private, and philanthropic funds. And then to Tanya's left, we have Craig Saddlemeyer, who is the co-founder and cooperative development organizer of Raise Up in Lewiston, Maine. And Raise Up was created in 2008 to operate safe and affordable housing that is democratically controlled by its members on a nonprofit basis. Raise Up has used tax credits to build cooperatives and is advocating legislative changes that would allow cooperatives to access a wider range of funding sources. So to start us all off, that was a very kind of minimalist introduction to each of you. I was hoping you could provide a better introduction to yourselves, to your organizations, and maybe to talk a little bit about what different kinds of ownership models your organizations are advancing, or in Crystal's case, funding. In what way are they social, as we've defined it earlier today? And how do they differ maybe from kind of conventional affordable housing of yore? So, Craig.
So, I'll start briefly by, I think, talking a little bit about the community in which we do our work, because I think it'll inform how I answer some of the questions a bit. So Lewiston, Maine is a small mill town. It's Maine's second biggest city, but I think folks from Boston would say we're a small city. And we are, the neighborhood in which we work, the Tree Street neighborhood of Lewiston, is one of the poorest communities in the state and also most racially diverse. Approximately half the neighborhood are African immigrants, And our member owners of our organization reflect that. Over half of our member owners are African immigrants. We are an affordable housing organization that is exclusively owned by a resident. There's no outside ownership. We were a limited equity housing cooperative, completely member, volunteer run for 7 years, from 2008 to 2015. Since 2015 until now, we've been a professional organization with staff, more growth-oriented. We're still not very big, and we'll probably get into some as to why, in terms of what financial opportunities there are for housing cooperatives in Maine or the country in general. But we have a portfolio of scattered site units that are all under one housing cooperative. We have our original buildings that we developed, which are like 100-year-old New England triple-decker buildings. We used a variety of funding sources, including homes, CDBG, CDFI loans, low-interest financing, philanthropy. Our very first building we were able to do in a very simple way. It was just, one good loan from the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, a little bit of gap financing from the city, and then resident equity invested in it. We were able to put together a successful project. As we've grown and looked to serve folks that are more vulnerable than the original founders, that have less resources to invest and need more support in the organizing effort, we have moved from a limited equity model to a group equity model, which is more nonprofit based. There is financial gain to the residents, but it's in the form of savings rather than return on investment. And in general, my title is development organizer. We started from a community organizing model. We were doing tenant union work. We were trying to stop bad urban renewal plans. We were trying to change the culture of development at City Hall and in the community. And we also grew at a time when our buildings were being neglected. They were burning down. We were having crisis level, fires in the neighborhood. Residents didn't have safe housing, and we didn't want to wait around for landlords neglecting their property to change their hearts. So we started developing our own stuff. But organizing has always been what we've brought. That's sort of like the center of our housing model. And my role today as development organizer, I've played kind of all the different roles for the housing co-op over its history. I really see my job as not just developing housing units, but trying to make every step of the affordable housing development process as empowering for the residents as possible, and trying to translate what is a very complicated and for a basic human need, that is housing, I think a far too complicated system of finance, making that as accessible as I can to our resident decision makers and leaders, and looking to play whatever role based upon the decisions of our residents we see as ours to play in the housing justice movement. So it hasn't been 100% housing development. We have developed community gardens. We've helped develop what was a community-based space for the Somali Bantu Community Association. They flourished there. They've moved on. They own their own property and are doing awesome cooperative farming and development work. Now it's an Angolan child care center. We have we played a huge role in the planning and application process for a Choice Neighborhood Grant that Lewiston got. It was the smallest community in the country at the time to be awarded the Choice Neighborhood Grant. Our Lewiston Housing Authority hadn't developed anything since the 80s, I think, any new property, and they were kind of in preservation mode. And our work in the neighborhood helped sort of jumpstart that and bring the Housing Authority to the table, and now they're doing development again. And we also formed a statewide coalition to advocate for tenants' rights. So we try to, there isn't a lot of money out there, again, for housing cooperatives, so it's not easy to grow, at least for the urban multi-unit housing cooperative type that we are and the income groups that we serve. So we look to different opportunities to play our role. And at the same time, we're trying to pave the way for housing co-ops, which we'll get more into later, I think. But that's a little bit about us.
Okay, this is on. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tanya Hanel. I feel like we don't have a lot of time, and it's Friday afternoon, and you guys don't know it anymore because there's no windows here, but it is beautiful outside. And I also feel like the people who are here, like you guys must be just like the really die-hard people. So I'm going to speak mostly about the East Boston Neighborhood Trust, which is one particular project, really, I hesitate to call it a development because we really didn't develop anything. We didn't build anything, I should say. So I'm just going to say that, I'm learning so much today about social housing and about all the people who have been doing it for so long. But I was really lucky to Ida is telling me to stay on topic. I was really lucky to be brought into the East Boston CDC, which was it was a 50-year-old, more than 50 years at this point, organization, and it's not the Center for Disease Control. It's the Community Development Corporation, of which there are many in Massachusetts and even in the room today, by 3 older Italian gentlemen. Al Caldarelli, I can't tell this story without Al. One of them, the deputy director, became a realtor way back in the day when he was young. And he just was watching the market. And whenever anything would come on the market in East Boston, he would try to scoop it up. We would try to find a way to buy it with the help of the city and also with our own money. And the mentality really was and is, we want to own everything. We want to own our neighborhood. And I do believe that, to the point of this panel around financing, that the best things happen when there's a need, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that we're both in low-income neighborhoods where, there's large communities of color who have had to figure out ways, had to get creative about how to stay in their neighborhoods and how to own their neighborhoods. And so at this particular moment, there was a 114-unit portfolio that was being marketed by Jones Lang LaSalle, and we were just blown away. It was triple deckers. Someone had gone out and put together, just gone to every open house over the course of a 7-year period, and I probably saw them at most of them, right? And bought up, small triple-decker properties and then packaged them, and the idea was to go to the international market now with this portfolio. I mean, you don't use Jones Lang LaSalle to find a local buyer. So Sal sends out this email and he's like, what do you think, guys? Should we go after it? And and to my amazement, when I said yes, they were like, great, go do it. And sometimes I think that it just takes that hubris, it takes that leap of faith to start down a path. And my board of directors, I will tell you, CDCs are not excited about buying 36 not dilapidated, but older triple deckers. Nevin is my project manager. Like, he is managing spreadsheet after spreadsheet on these properties. It is not a glamorous thing, but my board of directors knew that this was the crux of our problem in East Boston, is displacement, and the displacement was happening in our family housing. We are not replacing 3 and 4 bedroom units with new construction at the rate that we're losing them in the private market. And so we had to figure out a way to make it work.
I'm Crystal Cornegay. I work for the Massachusetts Social Housing Finance Agency. We've been financing social housing for over almost 60 years. It was just funny, I was thinking this earlier when Kenzie and Margaret were talking about the deals they were talking about. We financed every one of them. every one of the deals that they mentioned from early on, from Harbor Point, right, the repositioning of Harbor Point. And the thing that Jim Stockert always reminds me of is that we are like the second or third housing finance agency in the country, and we were founded to finance mixed income housing. And so while that sounds like, oh, that's nice, it's like, this is 1964, right? And we're talking about mixed income housing in 1964. That's a big deal. And so every dollar that we put into a project, that project has to actually have affordability in it of up to 80% AMI. And so we finance deals that are 100% affordable. We finance deals that are mixed income and varying levels and have development expertise. The other thing I think about the agency is the translator of capital markets and their investment into these kind of deals. I worked for many years at Urban Edge for Mosa Kakobian, who is a counterpart.
He's an East Boston resident.
And a contemporary of these guys, and like talk about own everything. Yes, right? It's like, should we buy? Like, why are you asking? Isn't it for sale? And so totally understand what that is, and totally need to always need to figure out how you get to finance those things, right? And so a key part of social housing finance, right, is about finance, and that's government finance, but it is not sustainable unless you can figure out how you get capital markets into these things, because capital markets, and that capital markets, you know, are both more flexible and, you know, more constrained, right? And so it's like, and so you got to figure out how to kind of thread that needle to get what you want to get out of that. So.
When you talk about capital markets, what do you have?
I mean, we sell bonds on the open market, and have the taxable, tax-exempt bonds, have the ability to do that. One of the fun things about the agency is we've been doing it a long time. We're really good at it, and we make money. And we, you know, like a nonprofit, the designation, we use the money to invest into other kinds of things. And so many things that you'll hear about mass housing is, you know, we're the first of, and so we were really one of the first workforce housing programs that we had, but that was because we had this program that we did 30 years ago. That program, you know, had a bunch of payoffs, and we used that money to invest in something that was needed at that moment. And so, and it's the same thing, a similar thing with the Momentum Fund, right? It's like we're at this place in the economy in which, you know, this is me talking, I don't think work pays, right? It's like we used to have this economy in which you could, you know, get a high school diploma and get a decent job, and then maybe you lived in affordable housing for a while, but you know, saved enough money so you could go someplace. That doesn't happen anymore. Right, we send our kids to college like we're supposed to, right? That's the American dream. We send our kids to college, they get out, they're $250,000 into debt, they get a job, it's like, you know, $70,000. They can't afford to live anywhere except at home. I'm mad about that. Right? And so I want to so we also have a production problem in the country, but we also have this old tool that we had for zoning, which is 40B, and which, you know, it has some built-in affordability requirement to it. And so, but those deals were stuck too. And so that was how the genesis of the Momentum Fund and how we got that funded to move forward.
Thank you. I know before we kind of use our imaginations to think about new funding sources for social housing, or maybe revamping existing ones or expanding existing ones. Can we talk a little bit about those old tools? What kinds of barriers or challenges do you encounter when you have to talk to a conventional lender and you try to explain what a shared or limited equity co-op is, and they say, I just want one party to sign on this line, and you're like, but I have 50 tenant owners. You know, like the forms aren't meant. Even the forms, something so mundane, are not meant for some of these models. Or, you know, when typical affordable housing, we talk about the layer cake or the lasagna, or, you know, like all the 15 different sources in your capital stack. And each of, you know, over the years, that kind of structure is ossified a little bit, and the different sources know how to deal with each other. But now we're talking about something really different, and we're talking about resident power, and we're talking about, you know, alternative kinds of even sort of physical designs. How well or poorly do those old tools work? I'm curious, Craig, with your experience, you used LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, to build cooperatives. How easy or difficult was that?
Difficult. But in 2008, when we were starting the first housing cooperative and we walked into our local bank, they wouldn't, even though we had an appointment, they didn't let us sit down. We were standing there, and they were like, "Okay, hold on, we'll get the loan officer." And he came in, he just said, "Who's going to guarantee the loan?" And none of us even knew what that meant. So he's like, "Get out." And Cooperative Fund of the Northeast has been basically a partner on it in every project, and they were, you know, incredible and worked with us not just to like lend us money and charge us interest for it, but to actually like help connect us with technical support to make that happen. Again, that's for our traditional cooperative housing. So for LIHTC, we are, in Maine, we're the first housing cooperative to use the low-income housing tax credit. We use the 4% program. And no one at the table knew how to do that. We did talk to staff at Champlain Housing Trust to learn a bit about their model. And I'll say the simple version, and we'll see if there's time for the longer version. But I mean, the simple version is that LIHTC is for rental housing. And in general, most of the programming for housing funds, certainly in Maine, and I think largely nationwide, just sees housing as rental or homeowner, traditional home ownership. And cooperative housing is both. You are leasing your unit, and you are an owner because you own your share of stock in the cooperative, and you and the residents are the exclusive owners. So you fall into both. And the way many programs define things, they define home ownership and rentership as mutually exclusive. So the fact that if you're in the other one, you must not be the thing they're processing an application for. So we definitely encountered throughout our history a lot of applications getting stalled, and to the point where it would have been preferable to just get a no rather than wait 6 months to a year and a half for the no, or to the we still don't know. So one thing we've done in Maine is change the law to help make that classification process more clear and more efficient, and help future cooperatives gain access to those programs. But in the case of LIHTC, again, it's for rental housing. We are a group equity housing cooperative, and when we started the process, and we're asking our legal team, like, can we develop low-income housing tax credit project, folks were like, yeah, we think so. We've heard of it being done before. As we got into the negotiations with the syndicator and with Maine Housing and learned more of the other examples out there, the answer is a housing cooperative can participate if the housing cooperative itself does not own the project. It can lease the project and have cooperative members that are then leasing from the housing cooperative, but someone else has to develop and own it. In our case, we were the developer, and we do control the general partner, and in effect the limited partner, and et cetera. So if you're going to be the developer owner, I mean, maybe a quicker way to get to the conflict here is, I think in the eyes of a lot of folks that want to be a part of a housing cooperative, that truly want to have governance of their property, if your housing cooperative is leasing from someone else, you're still a tenant. And throughout that negotiation process, with tons of gratitude to all of the partners involved in it that made it possible, a lot of the conversation was around limiting the investor's liability and limiting Maine Housing's liability. And it was for me, it was a very emotionally difficult experience, just because up until that point, it was just much easier to really center the needs of residents. And like every conversation was about maximizing resident engagement, resident benefit from a project. And the entire LIHTC conversation was, how are we making sure that the investor gets their money back? And just not, and seeing tenants as a liability in that process. So rather than seeing tenants as something that is bringing, like, that they have value to bring other than just paying rent on time to the process, that they have wisdom, that they can hold the management accountable for the condition of the property rather than, the inspections, that they can actually, if they are truly made to feel as joint owners in the venture, invest their own money, improve their apartment because they understand how it's going to benefit them, whether it's through a return on investment if they get to sell their share of stock, or whether it's simply in improved living conditions and the ability to keep adapting their unit in ways that will make them want to stay there longer. All that felt very absent from the process. So
seeing them as sources of value instead of a liability. It sounded like you had to reframe.
Yes, yeah. So I guess
Yeah.
The last things I'll say on this for the moment, I suppose, is, in general, I think it's the primary way that we build new affordable housing. So I don't want to discount it. Ideally, we'd have programs that are designed that actually recognize the housing value and the social value and just all the things that make, I think, cooperative housing worthwhile. We need programs that recognize that full slate of attributes. At the same time, we're not counting LIHTC out. For one, we'd like to convert it to full cooperative ownership, when the initial term of the tax credits expire. The bond that's issued, basically there's a lot to untangle in terms of how much of that language points back to the requirements of the IRS rules and whether that's baked into the bond
or extending the time period like they have done in Vermont, so that 30 years is not the end of that affordability period.
Yeah, well, we control it, so that part we're less concerned about. It's 45 years with Maine Housing, but the point is, will Maine Housing allow us to convert it to full cooperative ownership, continuing to meet the other affordability criteria. But so the other piece I wanted to mention, so as a group equity housing cooperative, we have 501c3 status, and our residents own the co-op, but they cannot profit from it. And the residents of the LIHTC property are not allowed to be members of our co-op. So we have this weird thing where we've got traditional cooperative housing, and then we've got a rental project where we're trying to back in slowly and with a consent of our partners as much of the cooperative stuff as we can. One question we have for the IRS that it doesn't seem to me to have been answered is, does a group equity housing cooperative where the residents do not profit from their investment, can that meet the definition of rental housing? Because cooperatives have not been defined in a way that answers that question. I think mostly what we've been dealing with is legal interpretation. Again, getting back to this liability piece, lawyers representing investors interpret cooperative housing to be too much of a gray area to go into, but if we could get an IRS determination that says, for the purposes of the IRS program, this type of cooperative housing is rental, that might be a way that cooperatives could actually access the program and stay perhaps a bit more true, but you still have the investor piece.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tanya, I'm curious, with your project, it was scattered site, which also can be a challenge to fund as opposed to a larger multifamily project, that's on, one parcel of land. Was that a challenge in raising funding, and what was your experience with, the various lenders and maybe conventional funding sources that you considered?
I guess what I will just say is that it's too hard to always make every project fit into the LIHTC mold or fit into, is it strictly a production project? Is it a preservation project? We had an anti-displacement project, and it just turned out we didn't have a single program that had anything in Massachusetts about anti-displacement in it. And that was, and the good thing is I think that there's a growing recognition that that is something that we need to be thinking about and working on. And so it has certainly catalyzed, and I shouldn't say that actually, because AOP was very much an anti-displacement program but it was the city of Boston, right? It was a local municipality and it was all local sources. But I do, to the point of social housing and to the point of doing and thinking differently, it has been so freeing to have access to capital that did not have those strings attached. And I've worked in the private sector, and so I knew what it took to raise private equity from wealthy individuals or from mostly wealthy individuals. And honestly, they want their money back, right? They want their money back and they want a return on it. And who am I to say, no, you can't invest in this project because, you can't leave that wealth to your kids and blah, 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 blah. But it turns out that there is this amazing group, and they're called Trust Neighborhoods, and the very, their name in and of itself was appealing to the East Boston CDC. And what they were doing was they were going out and quietly raising capital from socially conscious investors. And they were also talking to philanthropic organizations that were talking to them about putting their PRI, these larger funds that do need to make a return, but it's a lower return. It's a 1%, a 2%, a 3% return. Put that into neighborhoods that don't have the money to go out and buy their neighborhood themselves. And so this was the oldest model, was CDCs were bringing outside investment into our neighborhoods. I had a real sort of aversion to that because I had only dealt with private investors, and I really feel like they're extracting everything they can from my neighborhood. And so I'm watching private investors do it. How am I gonna go out and you're saying there's different private investors out there who are not gonna just extract everything from my neighborhood? But we did, we worked together and we raised $8 million. And I can tell you right now, the East Boston CDC we don't do fundraisers, we don't, so we never thought we could do that. And that really was the social housing movement. That was City Life Vida Urbana elevating anti-displacement work to a place where it was enough of an issue that social investors and larger philanthropic lenders who had never touched this kind of housing work before were willing to put their money into a purpose trust. And, I think one thing I will say is change is incremental. And so the role of having a CDC with a 50-year track record, who has a management company, who everybody knew, who could act as a guarantor, I do really think that there is a huge need for the social housing movement, for the land trusts who are stepping up, who are owning so much more of Boston now and doing that work, which is so expensive, and they're so small and they're just doing it. But I think that we have to sort of partner where we need to partner, right? We can be a guarantor. We may not want to own every 4-unit property. And there may need to be more places. Right now, the Purpose Trust is staffed by, and they actually control all of the decision making. So we decoupled the investment shares from the decision making. And so the social investors, unlike the LIHTC investors, had to give up control of decision making, and they had to really trust the neighborhood organizations on the Purpose Trust to steward this housing. But I will say that I think having the CDC involved, I think that did give people a little bit of level of comfort because the purpose trust was brand new. So if you're new in a space, I'm not saying don't get involved. I do actually think that we need new models and new thinking, but I do think that it works well to kind of partner with some other folks who have been doing this work for so long and working together.
Thank you. And I want to pick up on something that Tanya brought up, this decoupling of capital and control and the strings attached when funders provide capital to, again, sort of non-traditional social housing providers, they have influence over. They have influence over the design. They have influence over the sort of tenant mix. They have influence over location decisions and project governance, and you're in a position to have that kind of influence. How do you use that kind of power for good? And I'm also curious who you've partnered with, because now you've probably now encountered some of these sources. You mentioned capital markets, but also community development, financial institutions, or PRIs, or philanthropic sources when you're trying to put together these deals. I'm talking to Crystal. I'm talking to you.
I'm just curious.
I'm just curious. How have you attempted to use that kind of influence to sort of steer projects in this direction?
So at the end of the day, we're a lender, right? And so by the time a deal shows up to my door, the city of Boston has said, these are the design standards, you got to meet them. The state has said, this is how you have to interact with your stuff. You got a LIHTC investor, they've said this and that and the other. And so, by the time they show up to my door, I'm just trying to figure out, can you pay the rent? And can you, how do we interpret that so that we can actually get you capital on the debt side at a reasonable rate in the affordable space, and right, we're your last stop on the train, right? It's it's not. So there's a whole lot of things that happen before you actually show up on our door. Now, we have on occasion done some programs in particular, in which I'm thinking about Commonwealth Builder, which is an affordable home ownership production program, and which we have a lot more say about that because we are not the last stop on a train. We're kind of driving the train because you can't actually do a deal without us. We had this program, the workforce housing program, in which we have a lot of influence around that too.
What about with the Momentum Fund?
With the Momentum Fund, again, you show up, you've been through zoning, right? And so the locality has agreed that it looks like this, it's got this many units, and all we're trying to do is say, if you have gone through zoning in Massachusetts, right? And you've lived through it, right? You've gone through it, you're alive, your deal is there, yay, and now you can't get a bank to finance you, and the equity is super expensive, and blah, blah, blah. What is the way that public dollars can go in, the least amount of public dollars that can go in and make private dollars accessible so we can get that deal done, right? So my kid can move out of my house. He got somewhere.
Because that's what this is all about.
Because that's all this is about, me and my kid. And so we have the Momentum Fund basically is that, right? It's we're gonna take public dollars, a small amount, and we're going to invest it in deals in which private market investors are accustomed to seeing, right? Because there's a little bit of like, I ain't messing with y'all and your light tech and your like 50,000 forms and your this and that, right? It's like, so we're going to be an equity investor, but we're going to be a pref equity investor, right? Our money matters more than that common equity stuff. And so we have done that in such a way in which we make common equity feel better. They're like, oh, because it's still government money, right? They're like, oh, well, if the government want to figure out how to do that, I could do that. And because it's mass housing and we have a certain relationship with the GSEs, the government-sponsored entities, we can get access to debt at a certain level. And so debt at a certain level and a little bit of equity can make a deal go. And that's what we're trying to do. And these are, I'm making fun about my kid, but it's like these are affordable deals in the sense that these are workforce deals because those are affordable too. As Chris began the conversation, it's like the level of a housing burden has risen up the income level, and if we can't figure out, as you know, as a state trying to get that done, then our problem gets worse and worse and worse.
One last question, and then we're going to open. Right, we have an hour for this, even though we started later. Is that right?
Rachel, can I go?
Yes, we're going to end at 5.
Can I go back to your question really quickly and give you just some concrete stuff on top of in terms of how capital shapes deals a little bit? Like, so just for the East Boston Neighborhood Trust, I'll be very quick, but the anti-displacement work that the group who are being displaced in East Boston, we are traditionally an immigrant neighborhood, and almost all public money comes with restrictions that have to do with who you can house. And we really, I think, as a CDC, had struggled with our main tool to produce affordable housing in this neighborhood was public subsidy. And we were excluding a large group of people who needed to remain in the neighborhood because they didn't meet the criteria of those subsidy sources. The federal government, for instance, and the state. The city of Boston stepped up and removed those restrictions from their funding. And so we were able to use the private equity that we brought into the deal, the philanthropic subdebt, and those lenders were actively asking us to serve a different community. And that was just incredible to hear, right? That there were people out there who cared about that. So that was one way. And then also, like, the investor reports that I have to give for EBNT for this portfolio are so different than a LIHTC investor report. I mean, I have people asking, well, how many kids got to stay in their school? This person who moved into this unit, they didn't have an East Boston address previously. You know, did you want a Boston residency preference? No, we actually saw that our residents were leaving Boston, right? East Boston is more connected to Chelsea and Revere, which are not neighborhoods of Boston. So they were asking us, like, where are people, like, what is the displacement? How is this moving geographically? Those were the kinds of investor reports. I don't know if you've ever done a LIHTC investor report. I mean, it is mind-numbing. It's just numbers. It's just numbers. So it really does matter to go out and raise the capital in a different way and to be working with different lenders. And it also really matters when local municipalities recognize that there are certain strings on other funds and they take those away. It makes a real difference in certain neighborhoods.
Yeah, I'm sure working with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast was very different from that first lender that Craig, you walked into. I mean, the sort of the meta question for this panel is whether or not existing sources we can tweak minor reforms, incrementalism, whether we need fundamental overhauls or whether or not, we need to start all over again, or we really need these new sources. And I hear, from Tanya and from our panelists that there are some real advantages to bringing some new actors into this space. Right, so I recognize that our part of the conversation is over, and we need to open it up to our wonderful audience, our steadfast and strong folks who are here for the final panel, so we can take some questions. Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Liz Trice. So I'm a founder of Maine Cooperative Development Partners in Maine, and we have a fully permitted 90-unit limited equity cooperative development that hasn't been built yet, in part because of rising interest rates and construction costs. So we've been trying to figure out how to just get it started, and what we realized is, oh wow, if we could find an impact investor who could put up a couple $1 million for 5 years at 5% or less, like that would all we would need to get started. And so, doesn't sound that hard, right? But,
Where do you find them?
So where do I find that person? Because here's the opportunity to start the first big limited equity cooperative that's high profile, that could pioneer this whole model for an entire state. Everybody's watching it. And it doesn't sound that hard, but we haven't found that person or people or organizations yet. And we've already got some city money in the deal. We've got some city land. We've got some foundation money. And we want to create it in a way that it's replicable. So we'd actually rather have impact capital that we're going to pay back, and then we can do it again for future phases, rather than have a one-time grant and then say, who's going to do that next time, right? So I would just love to hear any thoughts you have about, what type of people or organizations are actually thinking about providing some capital that's at 5% or less.
Where do you find those long-term impact investors?
CDFIs. You gotta go find a CDFI, and you don't have to find a CDFI that's in Maine.
Because when we've talked to CDFIs, they're all like, "Great, we'd love to participate in your project at 7%." That's what we're hearing. So there are other CDFIs out there that
I don't know that you can do 5%. I mean, the CDFIs get their money from someplace too, and so they may be getting 5% money that they've got to put a percentage on top of, and that's why it's 7. And so. But I would say, we can talk afterwards. I have somebody in mind.
But many CDFIs have become more like conventional lenders, and I think there's a question of what's going to push them. There's talk of non-extractive finance and, I don't know, places like seed capital or working capital, or some of these shared capital out of Minnesota provides some of these sources. But it seems like also CDFIs need to be pushed to move in a different direction, or we need new organizations.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, right, that's what we said. We could get $5 million at 5%, but if somebody will give us $2 million at 1%, then we can do the higher percentage for the other $1 million.
So you see how complicated you just made that?
Yeah, but I just want to say, I don't think that, I don't want to trivialize what it took to raise $8 million. This man over here started an entire organization around having long, complicated conversations with people to bring them into an investment space. And those are hard conversations to have. And we're not doing it at scale, right? That's why, but I will say that one of the things that I love about the people thinking at Trust Neighborhoods is that as we got into these conversations, what came out of it was what we really want to do is we want to build this as an asset class, and we want to have it so that people can actually sort of trade their interest between these different housing, these different projects all over the country, so that it doesn't have to be so different than other investments, because housing is a different thing. Affordable housing, investing in affordable housing is very different than investing in market rate housing. I am not going to refinance and promise to refinance in 7 years and give you your return. That's where people who are investing in private housing, it's a 7-year return. That is the investment horizon for most private housing investment. That is a really scary thought to anybody who's owned affordable housing, right? We cannot be dealing with that kind of money. And so, but at the same time, in order to raise capital at a scale, to scale up the private capital, it can't be so radically different. People do have a need to move their money between deals and take it out and put it in and at different times. So I really do think that there's a role for like organizations who understand how to think about investment to be partnering with those of us who have the deals, right? And they were like, we have a lane. And I was like, great, I have a lane. and you know, so that's all I can say is I don't know them. You know, David knows them, but it's long conversations with people.
Great, thank you.
Got a question in the back, in the way back.
Good afternoon. My name is Selena Yutze, and I've formed a member organization within my co-op. And my thing is, I've heard all the aspects of everybody talking from the beginning to the end, but I'm still in this scared, uneasy situation because my mother has been a member of this co-op over 50-something years, and we're supposed to be like owners. And if you tell us we're tenants, you know, they'll say you're members. And I hear this gentleman, you know, you can own your home, you know, but we own the land. So you're still like tenants. You're telling these people when they come in, they put all their money, you know, and raise their little bit of funds because, you know, they're moderate to low-income people. And they move in these units, but they have no say. You know, even though we own the land, the housing, we're supposed to collectively have a say, but we really have no say because of the fact that when it comes to it, you're still put out. You know, you're still thing. And he said, well, you know, you could beautify your home and everything. When you do that, if you put a sink, the different color, when you move out, you better put it back the same way. Or you upgrade your property, you know, when you move out, all your money is taken that you invested in it because you upgraded. Now, the community, they want it back the way it is. So that's one thing. There's a lot of things I have to say, but then you have a governing board, and this is going to be the last thing, because it's a longevity of this co-op situation. And you all say co-ops, but really, we're renters, you know. And I think on the outside, making people feel like they're homeowners and everything, but when it all comes down, all we are renters because we're just 1 foot out of the door, you know, and because of governing boards that sometimes come in and because of the forces of being, and look at all the co-ops around the Boston area, they're going through the same situation. People take charge and they're not listening to us. Yes, we should have a say, but if you have a say, guess what? You're able to be put out. You know, oh, if you say this or you go with the majority, we're going to take your unit. We're going to find a way to put you out. And that's the position we come in. And so, you know, I hear it. It sounds good. But this social housing with co-op, I think we need to open doors because nobody want to touch this co-op situation because they're co-ops and they're privately owned. But I think we need to start opening the door for co-ops and really looking into them and the selling and the buying of these shares and stuff and see, you know, what's really going on. And I think education, when the people come in, really educate them about what they really have and what they don't have and what they can do and they can't do.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Craig, maybe you could address this. How do you reassure people that this, you know, form of ownership that people may not be familiar with is the right one for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think there's a lot of cautionary tales out there around cooperative housing. I try to be as clear as I can, both with like folks coming into the co-op and folks interested in starting a co-op, how it should not be romanticized. There's still a lot of challenges. Some of those challenges are unique to cooperative housing. They're challenges that you don't have in a traditional rental or traditional homeownership situation. I think in our history, I mean, our residents do have an extreme amount of power and decision making in their properties. I think the fact that we're very small maybe makes it easier for us to guarantee that. And again, the LIHTC example, we're a little bit removed. We have third-party property management, and we're still trying to figure out how to make that more of a cooperative experience. I can't speak to the specific co-op that you live in. I'm very sorry that you're going through that. I do want to, I have a question for that group. Is this the JP City Life Vida Urbana row by any chance? Thumbs up? Yeah. So Okay, cool. I just want to say your group was a big inspiration to the organizing that I was involved in back in like 2005 to 2010. I even made a little video about you a while ago. I don't know if you remember it, but anyway. So thank you for that point. And that's part of why, I mean, we're involved in supporting public housing. We're involved in supporting other affordable housing efforts that are not cooperatives, because we don't promote cooperative housing as the only solution, and we don't think that all these other funding sources that are out there doing good work, it is not our mission to like take away those funding sources and just force everyone to live in housing cooperatives. I think that would be a big mistake. And some people who are really excited about co-ops think like it should just all be that. And I have a lot of confidence that cooperatives have something to offer, and that some folks are ready to really succeed and thrive in cooperative housing. But my confidence is also like, not at the point where I think it's for everyone, and that I don't think cooperative housing has proven itself to be the solution. But I also think it hasn't had many resources to even like have a fair shot at it. So yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say is cooperative housing. I mean, in some cases, I feel like famous ones often come from New York City, which has a rich tradition of like great working class cooperative housing, and also like much more elitist cooperative housing that actually uses the cooperative model as a form of discrimination. So the leadership and the principles of the founding members and how that is carried through over generations is really important. The model itself is not going to guarantee just outcomes.
Madonna was rejected by the co-op board of the house that, in New York. And just a fun fact. One last question. Yes.
Oh, he got a mic. Oh, sorry.
Here we go.
Thank you. My name is Louise Elving. I work with a small consulting group based in Boston called Viva Consulting, and I've worked with community-based affordable housing for many years. And mine is a financial question in this moment, when we are facing perhaps the enormous cuts in rental subsidies from the federal government, in changes in the federal tax code, which if it cuts further for those at the top of the tax code will reduce the value of LIHTC investments perhaps, and who knows what else will be coming down the road. And my question is, if any of you have ideas about how we pull people together, which needs to be across our states and across the country, to begin to push back effectively in a world which at the moment feels like it's very supportive of the federal government being reduced and cut and cut. And our industry may be quite devastated if these things go through, because even mindful of Suzanne's initial comments that, well, we can't just rely on rent subsidies and LIHTC, but they are the two big bases of creating affordable housing in this country these days.
Thank you. Crystal, do you have a crystal ball to look into the future and tell us what's going to happen? Are these funds
I do not
sustainable?
have anything fun to say about this. So my mother said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything.
I think we're all scared, right? We're all... Yeah, well, I think we need to organize, and I think we need to resist. And we are unfortunately out of time, and that's such a big and chunky question, and I will urge you that during the reception and afterwards, we need to think about our response to all of these changes that are coming down the pipelines, from tax laws and how they'll affect LIHTC, to the CDFI funds, to all the things that we hold dear and think are important to, again, sort of tilting the needle. But right now, I just want us to join our hands and thank these wonderful panelists.